Hello to all of my BPTV fans, YouTube fans, and Facebook fans. I'm Alan Levine, the Talking Machine. I'm honored to be doing my 70th Talking Machine show. I have another great guest. Will you please introduce yourself?
I'm Ray Reamer.
We are best friends. Have known him for about 13, 14 years, talk all the time. And we're doing Coliseum Combat Zone together, but we're talking about that in the next show. First off, Ray, where were you born?
I was born in Allegheny County.
Okay.
Up in the northern part of Allegheny County.
Whereabouts?
The Natrona Heights area.
Okay.
But I live in Butler County. I'm originally from Butler County, Sarver to be exact.
Well, that's why I wanted to narrow it down. We've heard about these things. I've been to your house. It's truly country. I'm the city guy, born in the Hill District. He's country.
Pretty much, yes.
Where did you go to school?
I went to Freeport, and
Okay.
That's also in Armstrong County right next door, and
Okay.
I graduated from Freeport High School.
So you travel all around living up north.
Oh, yeah, very much so.
You got nice highways out there. 28's better with when they changed it a little bit for me to travel there.
Yes, sir.
But I went there when it was terrible.
It was. Hey, and by the way, thanks for having me on the show today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. Well,
We've been talking about doing this for a long time, and now
yes,
here I am.
I dragged her in today for number 70. So where'd you go to school?
I went to Freeport.
Okay, and what grades did you go there?
Basically grades 1 through 12.
Oh, so you did,
So,
all your education was there.
yes, that's where my education was. And then
Did you like school?
I did
What was your favorite class?
history. History was one. History
We get
and
along
science.
because of that. I was hoping
Yeah.
you'd be in my wheelhouse, so yeah.
History and science were my two favorite classes.
That's why we're friends. Science class, I remember second and third grade being in science and experimenting.
Oh yeah, I wasn't really good at math, and I wasn't really good at the English classes. But I mean, I read a lot as a child. So
Oh, that's great. Well, I was like you. I had a great comprehension. So we do history, and you had to memorize everything. I was a shy kid. I'd raise my hand on every question. The teacher, after the first 3 answers, can anybody answer besides Alan?
right, yeah.
So I was getting compliments then. So I appreciate your history. I'm a sports guy, so I ask every guest, did you play any sports?
I started out playing. I was a very small, waifish kid. And I had big dreams and big desires. To play
Okay.
baseball and football. But
Well, around here, sports is king.
it's king. And I tried, but what ended up happening was I got injured very early on.
What happened?
I tore ligaments in my ankle really bad.
That's terrible when you're a young kid.
And yeah, and I ended up in a cast in my right foot. And
So you tore ligaments in your foot. That had to be extremely painful to get around.
unbelievably painful. And I was virtually in that cast for maybe 3 or 4 months.
Wow, that was bad.
And, I was an only child. My parents didn't, after that injury and they seen what happened, they really didn't want me to, play sports and get involved in that
Right,
too
so
much.
you didn't have support on that end.
Right. And my parents, I come from a working class poor, and I'm very proud of being in a working class poor situation.
Right.
I grew up being a working class poor person. So I respect that a lot with people. And I've always been for the underdog all my life.
Well, let's go a little deeper. Can you tell us a little bit about your great parents? Because we've talked about it many times, so I want to put it out there on what you grew up with and your religious beliefs on what you
Sure.
are today.
My parents were, they were strict Lutherans, and they went to St. Mark's Lutheran Church in Butler.
There you go.
And there's a St. Mark's Lutheran Church, I think, down here in Allegheny County somewhere, too. I guess that's kind of a
Common name?
common name for churches, but
Yeah.
I went to the church, that I'm still a member of the church, and I don't go as much as I should, but
Sure.
I was raised and baptized in that church, and I spent a lot of time with a strong Christian background.
Well, just a little side note, he can quote verse and chapter in the Bible like few people can, and it's impressive. I salute you on that.
Well, thanks. And, I give all credit to God for that.
Amen.
And that's where all my musical influences came from. As a child, I was very fortunate. We were very fortunate that, Sunday mornings, I'll never forget, Sunday mornings my parents would go into church early.
Right.
And we had this doctor of music who actually played the organ. We had a giant pipe organ, $1 million pipe organ.
Those are great. Everybody had them back in the day.
And he would rehearse Sunday mornings while the Sunday schools were going on in the church. And as a child, 3, 4, 5 years old, I was listening to all the great works of Bach.
You were impressionable back then.
Right. I was sucking this all in, absorbing all this.
And you had a good feeling about it?
And I had an awesome feeling about it. It was just like, you open heaven and you're hearing, the music of God. And that influenced me a lot. And, in my career, my musical career,
we'll
which
get
I
to
ended
that.
up doing.
What got you started, since you have a little segue to that? What are your memories of what made you want to be?
I think after I got injured.
Okay.
My parents were trying to guide me and direct me into a situation where they wouldn't have to worry about a physical injury. And I was still trying to play sports.
Right,
okay?
right. You didn't quit.
I didn't quit. I was still trying to play sports.
In the neighborhood and stuff?
In the neighborhood and at school, just in grade school kind of stuff.
Right, where everybody joins in, yeah.
One day I was playing baseball and I get hit in the face with a curveball.
Yeah.
And I come home and it was something that kids get injured, and this is what happens.
Hey,
to people.
I played tons of it, yeah.
But that kind of like put the kibosh to me. They were like, "You're not going to do that anymore,"
Right.
So then they kind of were guiding me into more creative things, and they said, "Well, you're not going to be able to do this." And after going to the doctor, for a broken nose and torn ligaments in my leg, and then I really messed my knee up.
Oh, you're kidding! Wow, what a trifecta you had.
Playing hockey,
No. So you were trying.
I was trying, but just some things aren't meant to be, and that's why I tell a lot of young people now, don't, especially young kids who are very physically active, very athletic people.
Their thumbs are strong nowadays.
Right. But I tell them this, I said, don't put your eggs in one basket. Don't try to rely on a sports career. But what ended up happening was, my parents said, well, you like music, and why don't you try to, why don't you play an instrument? At least you're going to go to the
So they
games.
suggested that?
Yes, they did. They were trying to be proactive about my career and teaching.
Great parents doing that, trying to guide you.
And I remember, they were like, well, we want you to play in the band at school.
Oh, wow.
Like a marching band thing. I wasn't really into that.
Yeah.
But because my mom and dad wanted me to do it, I thought, I grew up, like I said, honoring my parents and doing the right thing.
And having a strong faith.
So I tried to play trumpet for a while, and after a brief stint at
So that was your first instrument?
trumpet, yes.
You weren't happy with it?
No, I wasn't good at it, and after a brief stint at not playing the trumpet well.
You had a teacher and everything?
I had a teacher. I had a private. They got me a private teacher.
Hey, great parents.
Plus, even at school, I was trying to learn at school, but I just wasn't into it.
Right.
There was something about it.
I'll segue. Wait till you hear next what he started to do and what he became. So lay it on us. What did you do next?
So after that, I ended up, I wanted to go back into sports, and I just knew that, with my parents being worried about me being injured.
Yeah, they cared about and loved you.
And I didn't want that. I didn't want to cause that angst.
Yeah. So
I ended up, and at the same time, I grew up on my grandfather's farm too.
Right.
So I had that work ethic, So you're working.
You knew what was necessary to get the job done on a farm.
Right. And that's why
What were some of your tasks? Because people don't realize about chores. Go through the litany of that.
I have nothing but respect for farmers and agricultural people in this country. It's such a brutally hard job. When I grew up in the 60s doing it, my responsibilities were feeding big animals. You know, we had
wow. Like what?
We had horses.
Nice.
You know, we had cows. You know, we had the whole gamut. We had
Any pigs? Yeah.
We had pigs. We had sheep. We had goats. I mean,
so this was a working farm.
It was a working farm. We had chickens, you know, that laid eggs, and you had to collect them.
Drew and I drive around South Park, and the chickens are with the horses to calm them down.
Right.
So we like seeing the bunch of chickens that come out.
There's a great deal of responsibility doing that.
Yeah.
Because those animals are totally at your mercy.
Yeah.
Because you're responsible for feeding them and caring for them.
Water, feed, and everything.
And it's a 24/7 job.
You got to check on them.
And you got to check on them. And you're at the mercy of the weather. You're at the mercy of, you know, blight.
So you had a lot of barns around there and fields?
Where I grew up, it was...
What kind of acreage was the farm?
Well, my grandfather's farm, by most standards, wasn't a big farm. It was a 30-acre farm.
To me, being a city guy, that's big.
And it was all flat, so it was easy to farm. There was not a hill on it.
Oh, that's great.
But the next door neighbor was my uncle, and he had a 30-acre farm. So now we're doing 60 acres. And the neighbor next to my grandfather was a lifelong friend. The family members are still like all friends yet.
Right.
And they had 35, 40 acres.
So there's 100 there.
Yeah, so you're into, and everybody worked together. It was a very socially close thing that everybody worked together because it was so brutally hard.
Right. And they needed the help.
And we needed the help all the time.
Everything's all mechanized and corporate.
Now it's so far removed from what I grew up experiencing.
You've told me on the farms next to you, they plant all this stuff and harvest it all at once.
All at once. And
they don't rotate crops like Jefferson told you to do.
Right.
President Jefferson.
Right.
He wrote about all that.
You know, when I grew up, we planted potatoes one year. The next year we planted corn. We planted wheat.
You followed Thomas Jefferson.
Thomas Jefferson's laws. And you know, basically now...
Even alfalfa and Timothy. See, I know some stuff about that.
Well, it's good you do, because here's the thing. You understand that there's a lot of need in, you know, keeping the farms going in this country.
Well, horses eat the different alfalfa and Timothy among other animals.
And our food supply all comes from that.
Yes.
You know? But I grew up, you know, doing that, and I was exposed at that time, you know, I was like, oh, God, I was exposed to country music all the time.
Yeah.
Because my parents were pretty much into country music.
Tell them what you aren't.
I'm not country music.
He's from the country.
I'm from the country.
Does not like country music.
But I will tell you, my influences are so far the antithesis of country that, you know, people look at me and go, wow, you know, I can't believe that.
I'm still shocked by it, and we're best friends.
You know, and I had told you, you know, one of my biggest influences, I remember very, very early on, one of my biggest influences was Black Sabbath.
Wow.
You know, I was heavily influenced. I think back in the day when we had this, and kids don't get this and people don't understand this now because, but when you and I grew up, there was little FM radios. You remember that?
Yeah.
And it had a single earbud that come up and went in your ear, and you would, at night, because your parents didn't want you listening to music, but you'd listen to music and hide it and go to bed listening to, you know, these bands. And like I said, I'll never forget hearing Black Sabbath the first time and hearing the song Sweet Leaf.
You just clicked with that.
I almost fell out of the bed. That's how much I loved
it. Hit you right strong.
And so I went down that road. I went down that rabbit hole the next...
And what did you do?
So I wanted to play guitar.
Okay.
You know, and I kept saying to my parents, you know I didn't do well playing the trumpet, so give me a guitar.
I want to be a guitar man.
Yeah, I want to play guitar. So they bought into it, and they said, yeah, okay, we'll go down that road with you. So thinking that I was going to be Johnny Cash or
country,
Chet Atkins or, you know, Roy Clark.
Yeah.
And I respect all these people. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah, you heard enough of them.
You know, I'd heard enough. I mean, I grew up listening to stuff on the Grand Ole Opry and
Sure,
you know,
Nashville and everything
Nashville, Johnny Cash. You know, my parents used to watch the Johnny Cash show all the time. And,
Yeah.
you know, the Smothers Brothers. If
Yeah,
you
I remember
that.
them, yeah.
Yeah, I'm really dating myself here, but
Hey, I never been this old before.
I've never been this old either. But what ended up happening...
carry on. You got Black Sabbath going.
I had Black Sabbath.
What was your first guitar?
I had a cheap... My parents didn't spend a lot of money. I never forget...
What did it cost?
It was like $65. It was
Wow.
It was a cheap Teisco guitar.
There you go.
And, you know, over the years...
Is that an off-brand that was down there then?
Yeah. It was a... I think it was some kind of... It looked like a Fender Strat
Like
knockoff.
a takeoff on them, yeah.
Yeah. And...
well, they didn't want to go out and spend money on a Fender.
No. And they bought me this little cheap battery amplifier. You know?
So you had a little amp.
Yeah. And
You were sort of like Jimi Hendrix starting out.
Oh, well, I thought I was, but no.
I had to bring that in there.
So I ended up, like I said, you know, they got me private lessons, and for, you know, like the next 4 or 5 years, I took private lessons. And, you know, one of the things that, you know, I wanted to learn, you know, I wanted to learn the hits of the day. You know, I wanted to learn the Black Sabbath, and I wanted to learn Rick Derringer, if you remember Rick Derringer's
I do.
Rock and Roll Hoochie Coo.
I remember that song.
And,
you bring it up, and I remember listening.
You know, by that time, I was a huge Alice Cooper fan.
Loved
you know?
Alice Cooper.
Under My Wheels, one of the big influential songs. And you know, even early, you know, David Bowie, you know, with his Spiders from Mars stuff, you know.
Yeah, classics now.
Just great, you know, performance rock things.
Well, you told me a song before the show started. I want you to talk about that.
Well, you know, you and I had been talking. We had talked. You said to me a few nights ago, you said, so what was one of the songs you remember as a child growing up? It probably really influenced you. And I remember...
Thanks for listening to me, brother.
Well, you know, I don't always answer you all the time because I'm thinking about this and trying to remember. And
well, you're a wealth of information. They won't believe what you know, and we're going to get into that a little bit later. We got about 13 minutes to go, so give them this, then we're going to skip up a little bit.
The song that you asked me about, and I went back and looked it up, it was a song by the band called Jimmy Glimmer and the Fireballs.
Wow, what a name.
And the song was called Sugar Shack.
I remember that.
Okay?
Sugar Shack.
It was a big hit. It was recorded in 1963.
Yeah.
You know, and I was 3 in 1963.
I was 7. Or no, I was, No, wait, I was only 6, 6 years old.
And that was one of the things as a small child I used to really enjoy. My parents actually got a 45, and people don't know what a 45 is. But it was a
Did you have a record player or a console that you played the music in? Because we had a big unit that...
Yeah, my parents had
seems like everybody in the 60s had this big piece of furniture.
Yeah, that's what they had. And, you know, and as a
whoever
child...
sold them did well, RCA and all those people.
Yeah, as a child, I remember, you know, listening to a band called the Royal Guardsmen. Remember them?
That's going back,
They were a big hit, you know, the British hit.
They were coming over.
And the thing is, I remember then, you know, and my parents weren't buying me these albums, but, you know, I was working on the farm, have a little bit of tiny money they paid me.
Yeah.
And when I would go to back then it was...
Do you remember what a 45 cost then?
Yeah, it was like I think 20 cents or something. It was dirt cheap.
You could get a bag full of candy back then for that.
Yeah, I mean,
you gave up candy for records.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I remember buying one of my first albums was the Dave Clark 5.
No way.
And my parents were just, they were freaking out.
They were stunned.
They were stunned, you know. And, you know, but that was a good time, you know.
Right.
And as the 60s progressed on, and you know it as well as I do, you know, all that great music began to come out of the 60s. You know,
Look at what we listened to.
Oh, yeah.
That was created on the spot.
Absolutely. And, you know, like, I'll always identify you know, all along the Watchtower from Jimi Hendrix
Yeah.
with the Vietnam War,
Right.
you know. But yeah, I just, you know, I got influenced by that very early on
Yeah.
and found myself then getting into progressive rock.
Well, before you do that, how was your guitar playing improving?
Well, I was
Or did it?
It did, but I was being schooled by a woman who, you know, she was trying to teach me coffee house music. You know what
Not
coffee
rock
house?
and roll, yeah.
No, she didn't. She was
Like background music.
right. She was like a 40s, 50s. She actually played in a 3-piece band in a coffee house music situation.
No way.
She was an awesome player.
Well, you had a good teacher then.
But she was very terse and very hostile,
Wow.
you know, and you know, like I didn't like going
Right.
to learn, you know, music from her. So
Right.
after a while, I quit that, and then I started getting schooled by a different guy teaching classical music.
Oh, wow. So you got classical background too.
So that's and Baroque, classical and Baroque, and that really began to fit into.
Tell them where Baroque is from.
Well, Baroque music is like it's part of the classical genre.
Right. Like
And-
coming out of Europe and
Right. It's
I know a little bit. I'm like a garbage man with music.
yeah, sure.
I don't know the
Absolutely.
names and people, but I know the bands, and we'll talk about one of my favorite bands, Rush and Who, and
Sure.
stuff like that when we move on a little bit. I'm giving a little teaser because wait till you
Okay.
hear this. Yeah, but I'm trying to get your career on where you're going because we're going to focus after school.
Sure.
And what you did musically, and you worked other jobs. We're going to
Right.
touch on that lightly if you want to.
Okay, so we'll jump ahead a little bit here.
Yeah, that's what.
You know, by the time I was 14, 15,
Yeah.
I had been playing guitar probably 4 years at that point.
Nice.
And I was,
Thanks to your parents.
thanks to my parents, and all my friends at school were turning me on to, you know, late 60s, early 70s bands.
Sure.
And, you know, some of my big favorite bands, like I said, was Alice Cooper, Black Sabbath. You know, I started getting into Emerson, Lake and Palmer.
Yeah.
Yes.
baby.
Yes, with all the great progressive rock.
Yeah.
And then one day I
What
was...
about ELO?
ELO didn't come out till later.
Okay, I wondered
like-
the time frame. Yeah, so
they-
we'll eliminate that. Go ahead.
But Emerson, Lake and Palmer had a big influence on me from like the King Crimson stuff.
No, I like their songs.
And by the same time, you know, I was also into Deep Purple. Everybody wanted to learn Smoke on the Water.
That was one of my favorite songs, and I love their songs.
And so I was playing all those songs, you know.
On guitar.
On guitar. And, you know, I was 14, 15
You don't have
years
to
old.
brag, but if you're playing those songs, they were tremendous songs.
Yeah, and the thing is, unfortunately,
So you were learning.
I was learning that stuff, but I couldn't find anybody to play that music with
And help you, yeah.
Help me. But I just kept growing my career with music, you know, and, you know, later on, you know, I mean, one day I tell everybody this story. They laugh. I was walking through, you know, a Kmart very quickly,
They were big.
and I was with my mom, and you know, she would go into these places to shop, and I would go right to the records,
Yeah.
and be looking at records, new albums. And as you remember, during that time, they had them in these slots where you could look through
They had tables of them.
tables of them. So I'm looking
A
through
whole room area.
this whole section was dedicated.
And I know National Record Mart because they were near Ralph's Discount when I was working there in '71.
Yeah, but National
And that was
Record
at
Mart,
Pittsburgh.
NRM came on a little bit later on.
Well,
you know?
around '71 they were there.
Yeah.
For us.
For us. But what had happened was, for me out in the country, NRMs weren't there
Right.
until about 74, 75.
Well, they expanded.
They expanded. But I
And
remember
they had great stores.
going through a Kmart and looking at this album cover, and I thought, wow, Alice Cooper must be at it again. And I didn't see the name of the band.
Yeah.
Later on, I discovered it was Kiss.
Wow. All the makeup.
All the makeup. And that was
So
like,
you became a Kiss fan.
I was a huge Kiss fan.
And the makeup, you love
And
that.
The makeup. It was right into, And then, I was one of those kids that would stay up late and watch horror movies because I was a huge horror movie.
Chilly Billy and Chiller Theater.
But we would always, I would always watch the Midnight Special in concert on ABC, and seen Kiss a couple of times, and they just blew me away.
Yeah, well, I'm going to divert a little bit because we only got about 4 minutes to go.
Okay.
How did you start your band?
I started my band.
It's a great story. So
I started my band by finding a drummer who ended up being my best friend for 46 years. And like I told you, he just died last year.
May he rest in peace.
But he was a Duquesne University
Mention
graduate.
his name.
His name was Jim Dodds.
May he rest in peace again.
And Jim was probably one of the closest drummers I ever met that could play Rush, could play Kiss, could play Emerson Lake. He could play anything.
He was like Keith Moon.
Yes, he was.
I got to drop that name out there. He was crazy, but he was great.
He was great. And what ended up happening, him and I practiced together for several years till we found a bass player. And
who was that?
And we ended up finding a guy by the name of Bob Molina.
Okay.
And Bob
is he still around?
No, Bob's deceased too. So
R.I.P. Bob.
We all, Bob Molina played in many bands around the Pittsburgh area here.
What'd you call your band?
The band at that time was called Pyre, Pyre.
Why?
Because we were heavily influenced by Black Sabbath.
Okay, I want it out there for him.
The funeral pyre thing.
Yeah, I relate to it.
And we wanted to develop a show similar around some weird thing like that, And
what did other people say about your playing?
A lot of people, when we first started playing, were very much.
He's not bragging because he don't want to brag, I'll just lay this out there.
They were impressed because we were doing a lot of Rush.
And you're young.
And I was doing a lot of Triumph because we would do, a whole set of Rush. We would do a whole set of Triumph. We would do a set of. By that time, we were doing Judas Priest.
Wow.
We were doing a lot of this stuff. And all these bands that I'm telling you, I ended up later on in my life, later on in the late 80s.
Well, we're going to skip to that.
Right.
Because time is at a premium here, and the talking machine's good at the guidance.
I know.
You were successful in your bands.
Right.
And you learned to become a sound engineer through trial and error and help from others.
I went to work for DeCesar Engler. And
famous here.
I went, put a thanks out there to Pat DeCesar and Rich Engler. And when I wasn't working for them, I worked for Gary Hollywood.
Another local guy.
Over at Hollywood Music, and I got to thank them. Thank Gary. Gary's been a personal friend of mine for probably 45, 50 years.
Yeah, and we got to move on from that. And I want to get into how many bands were you associated? Give us a short list of about 15 over almost 30 years.
Well, I've worked, most of my career was working hard rock, heavy metal, or arena
Understand,
bands.
Yeah, people are into that, so lay it on them.
So, from like 89, because I did a lot of local stuff, worked at the Stanley, worked at the Syria Mosque in Oakland, which is gone.
Right.
But, work with...
Throw some names out. Let's go, because we got to wind this down.
Work with, Rush, work with Scorpions, Judas Priest,
Keep going.
Def Leppard,
Scorpions.
Blackfoot, Kansas 8 times in my career,
Tell them about Journey.
Journey whenever they did later on with the... whenever they got rid of Steve Perry.
And you've told me about Foreigner also.
Yeah, I worked at Foreigner several times.
Name a couple big shows, because we're getting near the end of this show here with you.
One of the biggest shows that I ever did was Operation Rock and Roll.
Tell them about it.
Headliners were Alice Cooper, and these bands would switch off. It was Alice Cooper, Motorhead, and Judas Priest.
How many people saw that?
Probably millions of people.
Well, I'm just saying, this is the caliber of a guy who's helping me to do Coliseum Combat Zone, and we only got a few seconds left.
Okay.
How could somebody try what you did and succeeded at? What would be your guidance?
My guidance to them would be this: have the faith in God, have the faith in Jesus Christ, have the faith in yourself. Don't let anybody put you down. Anybody can be anything they want if they try hard enough.
You heard it here from my best friend, Ray Reamer. Thanks for watching our 70th show. We're going to come back in 2 weeks with our 71st show about Coliseum Combat Zone. It's what I own, and he's a consultant on my show. Stay tuned for the next one.